Hello, good afternoon, and welcome. My name is Valentina Gabusi, and I am in charge of teacher training here at Zanichelli. Today, we'll be discussing social emotional learning in English language teaching. And of course, I am not alone, so I'm very happy and honored to introduce you to our speaker and guest, Professor Margaret Layton. Good afternoon and welcome, Margaret.
Thank you, Valentina.
So let me tell you something about Margaret Layton. She has a long teaching career, both teaching literature and language in secondary school and sixth form college. She taught for 10 years at Università Cattolica in Milan, and since 2006 she has been writing textbooks together with Marina Spiazzi and Marina Tavella. And their latest work is Performer Shaping Ideas, second edition. So now, over to you, Margaret.
Thank you, Valentina. Today's webinar, we're going to look at social emotional learning in English language teaching, and in particular, developing emotional intelligence through literature-based lessons. So we're going to look at what SEL is, why it's important. Then we're going to look at some practical examples introducing social emotional learning in workshops. And we're also going to look at how it can be incorporated into everyday lessons. But before we begin, I'm going to ask for some participation from you. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. The first one is, do you know what SEL is? You have 3 possible answers. Yes, I do. Maybe, I think so. Or no, I don't. I'll give you a moment to answer. Well, hopefully at the end of this webinar, everybody will be answering yes. But let's move on to the second question. The second question is, when do you think emotional and social intelligence was first discussed? Was it at the beginning of the last century, 1909, midway, 1964, or perhaps in 1995? Again, you have a moment to answer. Oh, mixed result, quite interesting, but we will look at that in a moment. Before, I want you to look at the third question, which is, do you integrate SEL into your lessons? Here we only have 2 possible answers. Yes, I do. Or no, not yet. Those of you who have looked at growth mindset will know the word yet is all important. Let's see. So quite a lot are in the not yet, and hopefully again, at the end of the webinar, you will reply differently. You will integrate it into your lessons. So let's go on to look at social emotional intelligence. Why is it important, and what is the connection with teaching? Well, there's one particular quote that I think sums it up really well. Eric Jensen, an American teacher training, said, "There is no separation of mind and emotions. Emotions, thinking, and learning are all linked." This is the fundamental concept. Learning needs to come through emotional involvement and motivation. So let's look at the timeline. I asked you before, I think you may be surprised to see that actually the first time social intelligence was mentioned was in 1909, 100 years ago, in Moral Principles of Education. Then in 1920, social intelligence was defined by Edward Thorndike as managing people, acting wisely. 1964, Michael Beldock introduced the term emotional intelligence. Howard Gardner, in his book Frames of Mind in 1983, introduced this theory of multiple intelligences. And moving on, 1990, John Mayer and People Solvay, very important psychologically, produced a scientific model around 4 branches: perceiving, identifying, appraising, and expressing emotions, using emotion to facilitate thinking, understanding and analyzing emotion, reflectively regulating emotions for personal growth. We are moving closer and closer to the modern concept. In fact, we have Daniel Goldman, who perhaps more than anybody else brought it into our notice through a framework based on 4 competencies: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. He was the one who brought it into the concept of education, organizational development. Further to this model, in 2006, he divided these into 2, so that he put self-awareness and self-management under emotional intelligence, and social awareness and relationship management under social intelligence. So what are the aims of SEL? Why does it matter within our lessons? I think all of you have come across situations where students are frustrated. This is boring. Why do we have to learn this? They need motivation. They need to come to terms with their own inner ability to learn. So this is where SEL comes into its own. The importance, in fact, has been recognized at the highest levels. And even in Italy, the Ministry of Education brought in a law a year ago to introduce a 3-year experimentation, because everybody now recognizes the importance of integrating soft skills into the Italian national curriculum. We need to look at the holistic development of students, partly in order to prevent or diminish school dropout. Students need to better understand their thoughts and emotions, to become more self-aware, and then after, to become aware of others, to develop empathy. We all live in some sort of community, so all of these skills help. In fact, the model I want you to look at now is called the castle wheel, developed at Harvard in America. It introduced this methodology so that students learn to better understand their emotions. It puts social and emotional learning right at the center. Then they produced 5 competencies, 5 areas: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Important within the classroom environment, but also, as you can see from the wheel, classrooms, schools, families, communities. It helps students to make positive, responsible decisions, create their own frameworks, build positive relationships with others. We'll move on you will see within the classroom, cell instruction and classroom climate. So we introduce cell not just as a subject in its own right. It's incorporated in everything the students do within the school and has to influence them throughout the school year. We can do it in different ways, in many different ways, but we are going to look at two in particular. The first one is lessons completely devoted to social-emotional workshops. And the second is looking at tasks or approaches that can be incorporated into other lessons. So, moving on, we talked about within the wheel, creating a climate, an emotional climate. How can you do this? Very simply and actually quite quickly at the beginning of lessons, you can just have a mood meter. The students need to know how they are feeling. You can do it through the senses. If you look at the next slide, you can do it visually, or you can do what we call the 5 senses activity. So students identify 5 things they can see, 4 they can touch, 3 they can hear, 2 they can smell, and 1 they can taste. Why? To bring them into the moment, to break from maybe distractions that they had. It brings them into the moment, focuses them. And then this is creating a positive climate to then go on and do social-emotional learning activities within the classroom. Okay, so we have either lessons completely devoted through workshops or different tasks. We'll look at both of these, and we'll begin with the first. We're going to look at social-emotional workshops. All of these that I'm going to show you are taken from Shaping Ideas 2nd edition. And we're going to look at those 5 emotional learning competencies that were shown in the wheel. So self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision making. It can be applied both in the classroom, at home, within communities, and we're going to look at them individually. So starting with self-awareness. What is self-awareness? Well, it's the ability to understand your own emotions, your own thoughts and values, how they can influence behavior. This includes integrating personal and social identities, linking feelings, values, thoughts, examining your own prejudices, biases, experiencing self-efficacy and agency, having a growth mindset, positivity, developing interest and a sense of purpose. Now, self-awareness seems obvious, but actually it is quite a skill to get to know yourself and to get to know your aspirations. One of the ways we do this is by looking at role models or by looking at characters. Here's another question. I want you to think back to your own reading history and think about any character that particularly struck you or instinctively you felt some connection with. Someone who perhaps you think, I would really like to become someone like this. I remember in Little Women, I longed to be as strong and courageous as Jo. And then later in Pride and Prejudice, I wanted to be as brilliant as Lizzie Bennet. So take a moment to think, who is a character in literature that you connected with when you were a teen? Write it in the chat.
Hey, Margaret, I am just intruding just to write you some of the answers in the chat. So As you predicted, Elizabeth Bennet is very dominant, but also Mrs. Dalloway. And then we have some author, so Virginia Woolf, for example. Jane Eyre is very present. Mrs. Dalloway, way present. Juliet as a Shakespearean characters. Miss Dalloway is quite the Catcher in the Rye. So you have plenty of them. Heathcliff, which is quite fashionable today, and Jo March, Agatha Christie as a writer, and you have a lot of different characters and fictional ones, but also writers and authors.
Wonderful. Yes, I can see them popping up here. It's lovely to see Alice in Wonderland. Lovely. So we're moving into the area of why literature. Why literature? Because literature is a wonderful way to develop social and emotional intelligence. And thinking about characters, one of the favorite characters for teens, especially the girls, is of course Juliet. So that once they have begun to study the play, once they have looked into detail in a scene like the balcony scene, when Juliet's personality begins really to come forward and evolve, they can look at Juliet, they can look at the lines, they can look at the way she has developed, the way she uses words. Think of some adjectives that would describe her, like courageous, brave. And then the workshop is developing the idea of Juliet and her capacity to become an agent of change. Wonderful the way that a character from Shakespeare from the 16th century can still have such meaning today. And even Taylor Swift has used Juliet. It's wonderful, this connection. So they look at Juliet's personality, they look at her strengths, and they look, this is the first exercise, put yourself in Juliet's shoes. This idea of being able to see somebody else's perspective. How would you complete this diagram if you were Juliet? So her style, her strengths, her aspirations, significant people in her life, habits, free time activities, thinking of Juliet really as a person of their own dementia. And once they have done that, they can move on. And in the next slide, we'll see the exercise relating it to themselves. Create a similar diagram about yourself to help you build your self-awareness. So ethnicity, gender, the family, social status, the obvious external forces, but also internal forces. Getting to know yourself. So self-awareness is closely followed as the next competence will show us by self-management. So you recognize yourself, you recognize your own emotions, but then you have to learn to deal with them. You have to learn to cope. Managing your emotion, my goodness, what a tremendous competence to have throughout your life. How wonderful to start learning about it within the classroom, within a safe, respected environment. So managing your emotion, identifying stress management strategies, exhibiting self-discipline, self-motivation, and setting personal and collective goals. Again, in literature, we have the possibility of sharing and discussing deep emotion. And for this workshop, we have used one of William Blake's poems. This is called A Poison Tree. And this is about anger. Perhaps before reading the poem, you can introduce the concept of emotion by asking them each to think of a strong emotion that they have felt and what made them feel and how they coped with it. Then they study the poem in groups. And after they've analyzed it and thought about it, they can maybe either write their own version of a poison tree with another strong emotion, or make an image, as long as after coming out with a strong negative emotion, they think of a positive, an antidote emotion. Again, it could be, if they wanted to, as an image. We are using their creativity. We are using their ability to teamwork, critical thinking, creative thinking, all the soft skills that you know so well. All of them come out in all of the social and emotional learning activities. So self-awareness we have looked at. Self-management of emotion we have looked at. The next competence is social awareness. So once they have got to know, hopefully, themselves well, the next step is to understand others, to understand the perspective and to empathize well. The classroom is probably the first place that many students come across such a widespread group of ethnicities, of social backgrounds, different personalities. It's so important to understand and respect others' perspectives, demonstrate empathy, compassion, identify different social norms, even ones you don't agree with, understanding the influence of organizations and systems. This social awareness brings us to a slightly more complex workshop. This is based on My Last Duchess, Robert Browning's poem, which is quite deep. And it can be quite a challenging text, the kind of thing that in a formal, old-fashioned lesson, the students might have found really quite difficult to cope with. But here, we're going to look at it within a workshop, and we're going to look at a couple of activities that could make it more enjoyable. And we're going to use the jigsaw activity. I don't know if you've used this in your classes before. In the jigsaw, here we have groups of 5, because actually the poem has been divided into 5 sections. Each member of the group becomes an expert on their section. They look at it, analyze it, and then bring it back to the group. And once everybody comes back to the group, we have the whole. They can be helped by hints like pointing them in the direction. Who's the Duke? Who's the Duchess? Who is Frank Pandolfo? The use of brackets, the sinister undertone. This is a poem that deals with gender, power, and control. It's quite complex, so the students mustn't feel that they have to understand it instantly. They can make notes on things that are clear, but also things that they don't understand. Once they have discussed the poem, once they have expressed their own feelings about the poem, then it can be used as a springboard to talk about more general discussion. These are very much topics that link to our contemporary times. Gender, such an important issue, power, control. The link to contemporary world is so important. The next activity, we've looked at 4, and we've come to the 5th, which is relationship skills. The ability to establish and maintain healthy and supportive relationships. So self-awareness, controlling emotion, empathy with others, all of these are necessary to build up the kind of rapport that you will need to develop good relationships. So they learn to communicate effectively, demonstrate cultural competency, teamwork, collaborative problem solving, maybe even showing leadership, offering support and help when needed, standing up for the rights of others, supporting your own, standing up for your own rights, but also learning to defend and stand up for the rights of others. Now, a workshop developing these particular skills is the fishbowl activity. I don't know if you have heard of this before or maybe used it in your lessons. It's an activity in which the students are divided into two circles, an inner circle and an outer circle. The inner circle discuss a text or a poem. They may be helped in their discussion by pointing them in the direction of the author's intention, the conclusions, whether they agree. The important thing is that the discussion is within the inner circle. Both circles of students are facing towards the center. The outer circle do not participate in the discussion, but they make notes and listen, observe, and make notes. These are other skills to develop. So at the end of the discussion, the students can, the outer circle can talk about the feedback, the ways they think maybe the discussion could be improved, how communication could be improved, a positive feedback. The inner circle, they can maybe give insights into the discussion, things that they would like to add, and they can also comment on how does it feel to be observed? How does it feel? Is it different to when you discuss things normally? It's an activity that helps foster empathy, and obviously it helps with communication skills. It should foster a growth mindset if the feedback is positive. There are definite rules on how the fishbowl activity is carried out, which are important too. Following rules is important. Critical thinking, problem solve, all of these. So the last competence that we're going to look at as a social and emotional workshop is responsible decision making. So again, a difficulty that everybody has in life is making choices, making decisions. And in order to make them with maturity and serenity, we have to have gone through the steps of self-awareness, coping with emotion, empathy with others, building up self-confidence, building up self-knowledge in order to be able to make a decision responsibly. So it includes demonstrating curiosity, open-mindedness, learning how to make a reasoned judgment after analyzing information, data, and facts, identifying solutions for personal and social problems, anticipating and evaluating the consequences of your own actions, active listening, note-taking, evaluating personal, impersonal, community, and in so many things that come together. The workshop that we have done is based on a famous poem by Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. I think, a wonderful example of the choices and how a choice can determine so much else. As Robert Frost says, that has made all the difference. So the students read the poem, discuss the poem, and link the content of the poem to themselves. It's what we call text to self. They have to look and see if the poem reminds them of moments within their own life, whether they can relate to it or not, and then launch into a general discussion in which these different possibilities, they can discuss which in particular is the one that most appeals to them. Well, welcome individual choices, making brave decisions, avoiding regret. So difficult. Thinking and learning from experience. Be good at storytelling. Or the last one, forge your own path. The courage to be different. The courage to take the road less trodden by. So they need to be encouraged to connect the text to themselves, look at how the poem might reflect their own decisions or moments of decision, and then move on. So, next slide. The last activity they might do is to think of the different perspective. What about if he had chosen the other path? What would have happened? What difference might have happened? They can write their own poem with the title, The Road Taken. They might imitate Robert Frost's style. They might, any poem or poet that they have studied in literature. So we have looked at all the different competencies and looked at how workshops, social-emotional learning workshops can be used to bring forward not only a deeper understanding of the literary text that they are using, but a deeper, hopefully, a deeper understanding of themselves. So important for their learning within the school, but then for their future outside of the school. We're also going to look at some activities that don't require an entire lesson that can be incorporated into others. And we're going to look at 3 different possibilities. The first one that we're going to look at is called reflective journaling. It's obvious that, as research has shown us again and again, that when the teachers make the lessons more personal, the students are more inclined to participate, less inclined to mentally turn off. Reflective journaling gives them this opportunity of a connection with themselves. It's like a kind of diary, but it's not about events. It's about thoughts. It's about their own emotions. It doesn't need to take up much time. A few entries. It's a way of making contact with themselves. A journal. Reflect their own experiences. A very personal thing. Reflective journaling. In shaping ideas, we have different exercises of this type scattered throughout the book. And every conceptual link, of course, has a social-emotional workshop, like the ones we've looked up to now. The next activity that is not a complete lesson is the use of vision boards or mood boards. Because there are some students who prefer visual messages rather than written. And for them, this mood board or vision board is is created with the idea of their own personal notice board, something they might have in their own study area. Some might have their own room where they study, some might have a corner of another room that they make their own, and they can pin up. Apart from photos of the girlfriend and boyfriend, they can pin up things that have been inspirational to them. They might be pictures, images, they could be dates or quotes. Anything that helps them to remember a particular moment. It might be a character, like we said earlier, in the self-awareness. Something that reflects their own personal aspirations and goals. And hopefully it's a way of helping them along the path in that direction. One other activity we're going to look at is storytelling. Now, we're going to look at two types of storytelling. Everybody loves stories. Storytelling is innate within our nature. So it comes naturally. A good opportunity for pair work, for group work, discussion that then comes to a common goal. The example that I want to show you is actually from an artificial intelligence workshop. Each of the links in the book ends with a workshop based on artificial intelligence, because it's part of our lives now. Everybody is using it. The students are using it. So we think it right that the students learn to use it in a particular way. This is an example. They are asked, first of all, in small groups, to think of an alternative ending to Wuthering Heights. Within the group, they can discuss it. They can think of an alternative ending. And then in pairs, they can talk about how they think Emily Bronte might react to their ending. After they have done this, then the teacher will put the endings into an AI chat box and ask the same question. What would Emily Bronte think of these endings? Once they have the AI answer, they can compare it to what they have done and look at the difference. The idea being, yes, we're going to use artificial intelligence, but it's not a Bible. We are going to use it as a tool. We're going to compare it to what we come up with ourselves. So this is the first type of storytelling. The second type of storytelling is purely visual. In some conceptual links before an important text, we have this element of storytelling, in which students, before reading the text, can share their own personal interpretation of a narrative. The one we're looking at here is from Mrs. Dalloway. Look at the pictures. Write a list of words or phrases that might be used to describe them. Include the thoughts and feelings that the pictures suggest to you. So, different types of storytelling. Looking at themselves through their own reflective journaling. One more type of activity that is an obvious social and emotional learning one is the debate. Now, probably many of you are already using debate as part of your language program. And it's such a tremendous forum for students to express their ideas, to listen to others, to express opinions, to defend opinions. They can look at pros and cons within a literary text, discuss authors, discuss characters, or discuss particular issues. The one we're looking at here, the debate workshop, should upbringing and education be gender neutral? A nice hot topic for today. So, we've looked at workshops that use social and emotional intelligence as a whole. We've looked at activities. We've looked at the idea of storytelling. Teachers often use storyboards. There are lots of possibilities within the internet to do so. So I'm hoping that this brief journey through social emotional learning has shown some of the enormous potential benefits that it can bring to students on an academic, but also on a personal level. Hopefully, those who manage to develop the idea of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, they will be better equipped to deal with their own personal problems while still at school, but also will be equipped to deal with problems that they have to navigate in the pressures that await them in their adult lives. So I would like to conclude this talk by showing a video from the second edition of Shaping Ideas, which actually contains 3 new videos. One is vocabulary-based, called What's in a Word. One is about places connected to particular works like Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, the Yorkshire Dales and the Yorkshire Moors, Shakespeare Stratford, Dickens London. The third video is called Live a Thousand Lives. And this is based on specific authors and their work. And the one we're going to look at together is actually talking about John Steinbeck. And I think is a really good example of how literature can be a positive influence, how it can open windows onto new perspectives, open windows into new worlds, and help build a positive culture, a culture of kindness and faith in a better future. I hope you'll enjoy it. We'll sit back and watch the video.
Let's be honest, reality can be too much. It seems like an endless cycle of misery, one terrible headliner after another. We're flooded with bad news, so it's only natural to either seek escapism or give in to pessimism. We're all heading for disaster. Still, some writers think that art is meant to stand for something, to help. One of them once said, "A writer who does not passionately believe in the perfectibility of man has no dedication nor any membership in literature." That man was John Steinbeck, and he meant that a writer has to believe that humans can do better, be better, that things can improve, and literature can help. Steinbeck dropped out of university to experience life directly. He worked hard, visiting shantytowns and migrant labor camps. Steinbeck was a committed humanist. He tried to understand people without judging them. And with his writing, he aimed to present people as realistically as possible. And if you think these are just noble words, think again. Steinbeck was so committed to his worldview that he even burned a manuscript because he felt it was dishonest, and it didn't tell the full truth about its characters. That seems a bit excessive. For his most famous work, The Grapes of Wrath, Steinbeck spent months gathering notes and first-hand accounts. And he doesn't shy away from hitting the reader with the full, raw reality of poverty, injustice, and hunger faced by the Jodes. The book was an immediate success. It was praised by critics, it stirred controversy, it was banned in parts of California, and won a Pulitzer Prize. But Steinbeck wanted to do more than just denouncing social injustice and raising awareness. The Grapes of Wrath depicts a harsh reality, but not a hopeless one. Every act of kindness, however small, shows that hope exists. Even in the darkest of places, the only way an unjust reality can be improved is through kindness, solidarity, and unity. And maybe that's something we still need to hear today. Did you like this overview of John Steinbeck's outlook on life and what he set out to do with his work? Do you think literature can change the world for the better? Write me a few questions on something you would like to know more about.
Before we finish, I'd just like to emphasize that all the activities and ideas that we have been talking about are within the latest edition, which is a second edition of Performing Shaping Ideas. Over to Valentina.
Okay, Margaret, thank you very much. They are all thanking you for the inspirational activities that you've been telling us in the last hour, more or less. And I have a few questions for you. So the first one is from Silvio, and he's asking, can SEL be also done outside the classroom? He's thinking about school trips, cinema, webinars, or other experiences outside the classroom. So what do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As we said in the webinar, it's not a subject. It's not something that is taught necessarily just in lessons. I think it becomes almost like a way of life, so that any interaction with the students is possibly a social and emotional learning experience. School trips, yes, wonderful. Encouraging them to interact, it's good because it's a very relaxed atmosphere. Often the classroom can be a little bit intimidating. So anything outside the classroom, even better. It's an ongoing activity. It's an approach to teaching that is completely different.
And on this line of thinking, Paolo is adding to the conversation that SEL might be also suitable for orientation activities and on self-awareness by, for example, he's quoting Lizzie's personal growth and self-realization when she reads Darcy's letter in Pride of Prejudice, or he's thinking about the moments of being that we find in Virginia Woolf's novels or Joyce. So do you think it's something that we can do on SEL and literature?
Yes, because I mean, Jane Austen is a really good example because very often her heroines have to grow. They have to go through self-awareness. And they have to learn to control their emotions. Someone like Lizzie Bennet, who has to acknowledge her own biases, her own prejudices, and overcome them. It's part of the maturing process. And at the beginning of that, you were saying, can it be part of orientation? Well, yes, of course it can, because these are all skills that will be extremely important in whatever career students design, even if they don't follow a career in their adult life, these are all skills that will be precious for them. Because self-awareness, self-motivation, help, and empathy, seeing other people's perspective, all skills that are management skills that are useful in so many walks of life. all of us are still on this learning process. They talk about lifelong learning, and I think social emotional learning is a lifelong learning.
Okay, another question is focusing on students who have a low level of English. So sometimes expressing emotion or expressing how you feel about yourself in relation to texts or to ideas can be harder if you don't have a good knowledge of English, vocabulary, and structure. So what do you advise?
I think this is true. I think I'm always amazed, actually, at the level, the linguistic level of the students. But yes, those who are challenged that way can use images. They can use images, they can, on a mood board or on a vision board. And one of the wonderful things about living in a technological world is that they can use computers, they can look for images, they can show their aspirations in other words, in other ways, visually. Images are so potent, and hopefully this will encourage them and inspire them to go on learning English so that they can express all these emotions using language. That's why literature, I think, is so amazing as a study here, because they can, through text, through poems, they can express the emotions in a way that they might not have been able to on their own.
People discussing in the chat, they were also discussing positively the idea of a fishbowl, since in a fishbowl you can put in the center, in the inner circle, those who can discuss with a higher level of English. And then you can also include in the outer circle those who maybe are not so confident in, expressing their emotion and feelings publicly, but they can, in a way, participate by writing, meditating, and then sharing their ideas. Do you agree with that?
I think that's a really good point. Yes, I think it is, because often within discussion in the classroom, there are students who are more able, who are more literate, who can articulate their ideas better, and the others maybe often feel a bit left behind. And something like the fishbowl activity gives them the opportunity to show other skills, because listening actively is a skill, often one that is neglected because talking seems so much more articulate. But listening and making points through listening carefully is very important too. I think that's a very good point.
Alessandra is asking you if you have any suggestion on how they as teacher or we as teacher can tackle the topic of anxiety in a second year class. Do you have any author or text that can be useful to that topic?
Often the whole idea of anxiety needs to be broached perhaps in a physical way, because when you're creating an atmosphere within the classroom that is suitable for social emotional learning, one of the things is taking deep breaths. It might only take a moment. I think anxiety needs to be coped with at a physical level. And a moment of quiet. When we were talking about the sensory activity, it is quite simple to do, but is surprisingly effective. Just to break away from other thoughts and to concentrate on, 5 things you can see or you can hear, and it just breaks away from the distraction. I think rather than a text or a poem, I think anxiety needs to be dealt with internally. And perhaps students need to recognize that they do become anxious, so they can prepare themselves. This is part of the self-awareness. They can prepare themselves with self-knowledge, and before a test, before an oral test, typical example of anxiety is just take a few moments and take some deep breaths. Simple activity, very simple activity, but an effective one.
Okay, I think that you partially answered also to this something that Roberta in the chat was writing. I write what she wrote. So I'm reading what she wrote. So there might be activities that touch some students in a very over emotional way, and so they might be experience a tough moment maybe. So how would you deal with them if you are doing, for example, an activity and some of them burst into tears or have a very strong emotional reaction?
A very good point. I think it is a good point. And I think that there could be some social emotional workshops that do bring about an emotional reaction. That's why before going into the workshop, it's important to create a positive, calm atmosphere through the breathing, as we said, through the activity that we said. And that if it does happen that somebody does come out with a strong emotion, that they take the time to deal with it. It must not be ignored, but it can be dealt with either on an individual basis or within the group, because empathy, compassion, is part of this learning process. They must help, and it's the responsibility of the class, not just of the student. If somebody has a very emotional reaction, I think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for them to come together to show their support for others. We kept saying within the workshop, you have to stand up for your own for your own thoughts and reactions, but you also have to stand up for the rights of others. And this gives an opportunity. So it shouldn't be looked at as something necessarily negative, but it could be an opportunity, a learning opportunity.
There were two different opinions in the chat among colleagues and teacher writings. One was asking, can be cell integrated into testing or evaluation? And some out there were just replying, these skills are just a part or a mean to reach a deeper level of involvement, concentration, engagement with the text and the literary periods. So these skills are not to be tested. But what's your opinion about that?
I do think it's difficult to test social and emotional learning. It depends on the teacher's methods of maybe while students are discussing things, they look at it and they think about it and give it. But I don't think you can formally test social and emotional reactions. They are such a personal thing. We're talking about personal growth. You're not testing knowledge. You're not testing whether they have learned a poem or written about it in an effective way. It is a very personal thing. I think it is difficult to test it. Within a debate, there are grids, marking grids that you can look at, and you could use those within a discussion. You can, within the fishbowl activity, you will see in the book that there is actually a grid there which points you in the direction of what to look at and what you can, and the students themselves give their own marks and comments. And I think that's fine. That's encouraging them and helping them and developing them, but it's not a formal mark from the teacher.
Final consideration is focus on music. So, would you recommend to empower a cell lesson with the introduction of music? A lot of the teacher in the chat thinks it's a good idea. Some of them are teaching in a liceo musicale, and they are saying that they do this mixture of arts within their lesson. But what do you think?
I think that's a wonderful idea. I'd love that, a lesson that starts with music. And anything that can inspire at the beginning of the lesson, which might be a beautiful picture, it might be an image, and yes, music, wonderful. I think anything that will help to create this climate that we were talking about of cooperation, in which the students feel at ease, in which they are relaxed, because the classroom has to become for them a safe place where they are respected and they respect others. So, oh yes, I'd love to have a lesson with music.
Okay, so I wish you could see and read all the positive comments that there are that are popping out here in our chat. One word is very recurrent, which is inspiration. You have detailed a lot of inspirational activities. Up to date, they have been described. Up to date activities designed to meet the contemporary school needs and today's challenges. And the other one is respect and for everything that you have done for us in this webinar. So thank you very much, Margaret, for all the interesting ideas.
Pleasure. I love the word inspirational. Yes, thank you for that. And thank everybody who participated. And you, Valentina.
Okay, thank you very much and have a good night.
Thank you. And you too.